Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about mobile health applications more broadly, sort of what the current state of the art is, as well as how as a clinician you can be involved in developing apps as well as then subsequently studying them. I have no relevant disclosures. So a general overview of my talk. First, I'm going to talk about health apps, what's currently available, what the potential upsides are, and then what some potential pitfalls are. And then again, how as a clinician you can be involved in developing and then subsequently studying an app. So just some background on myself. I'm a PGY5 general surgery resident. For the last 2 years, I've been working on developing an app to be used in the post-op bariatric surgery patient population for post-discharge monitoring of weight loss surgery patients. There's over 165,000 healthcare apps available to patients through the variety of different app stores. Diet and fitness account for many of these, but they also range a broad gamut of pretty much any chronic illness that you can think of to help patients manage these illnesses at home. So either CHF, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, pretty much any chronic condition that you can think of. There's probably an app that helps patients developed with the mindset of helping patients manage these conditions at home. So why are there such a large number of these apps? Like Dr. Evans just talked about, there's this huge focus on post-discharge care and chronic illness management at home to try and prevent readmissions. There's just a really big push hospital system focus on these issues. And given the increased ubiquity of smartphones, the FDA actually estimates that 1 billion smartphone users use healthcare apps. So given the just large number of these things, it makes it a prime target to focus on how to manage patients at home, especially if they live far away from your medical center. However, there is a downside to this. One study showed that of 30,000 weight management apps, about 50% actually charge a fee. Yet only 17 or 0.05% of those were developed with any sort of professional input whatsoever. So apps have excellent potential, but there's also a potential downside in that at best patients could pay for something that may or may not actually help them, and at worst they could actually be spending time with an app that may be offering them poor medical advice. So then it really does highlight the need for healthcare professional involvement in app development, and I think Dr. Evans' work in creating a website to try and rate these apps is an excellent start to that. So how can we as clinicians be involved in this? So the first step is really defining the clinical problem that you want to solve, that you think that a healthcare app will help you solve a specific clinical problem. So for me, that problem was dehydration and readmissions after bariatric surgery. And what we came up with was an app that sends frequent notifications, reminders to patients to get up and walk, to drink fluids frequently throughout the day. So really the first step is defining a clinical problem that you think an app could help you solve. And then subsequently, after you develop this idea, you want to interview the relevant stakeholders. So either other docs in your practice, or if you're developing an app that's outside of the scope of your practice, the physicians who actually work with those patients, as well as any mid-level providers, NPs, PAs, especially since they're really on the front lines of communicating with the patients from the office. And then you want to interview the patients themselves. And the reason you do this process is the more involved the end users are, the more you talk to the stakeholders, the more likely they are to adopt your solution. And I'll talk more about feasibility and engagement in a minute. So then once you have a broad sketch of what you want to do, the next thing you really have to think about is, does this fall under the purview of the FDA? Does this meet the criteria that's very broadly what they describe as a regulated medical device? And because it's such a broad definition, I thought that maybe just providing some examples would be helpful. So some examples of things that do not need FDA approval. One thing is electronic copies of already available medical information that's in print. So if you just want to give post-op discharge instructions to a patient, instead of a physical copy, you want to give it to them in an app, then that's not something that falls under the purview of FDA. Another thing is educational tools, either electronic versions of textbooks or things like UpToDate, or electronic diagrams for patients to help explain to them what their procedure is. Again, does not fall under the purview of something that needs FDA approval. And then anything that involves office logistics, so medical appointment reminders, scheduling medical appointments via the app, that's not something that would fall under the FDA. Broadly, the thing that really does fall under FDA approval is any sensor that's used to diagnose or treat an illness. So the best example of that is the Apple Watch that monitors the ECG rhythm and can diagnose a patient with AFib or a variety of other arrhythmia. Those are things that fall under the purview of the FDA. Another example I read about is an audiometer on the phone that can actually test for hearing loss. So if you're going to develop something that uses a sensor to try and diagnose or treat an illness, then that's something that does need FDA approval. And if there's any question, you can always contact the FDA. There's a website on the slide that they have very broad information. So then once you have your sketch or an idea, then how do you create an actual product? I'm someone with a very limited computer science background, but there's always partners within industry or within academics. Most institutions have some sort of a health tech campus with master's, PhD students who are more than willing. Like at Cornell, we have a whole tech campus, and you'd be amazed at how much they want to get involved in app development, and they have really a strong computer science background. So even if you don't let that discourage you, because you can always reach out to someone who can help you with the more technical product software development side of things. And then I really want to highlight this iterative design process, because once you have your software, once you want to roll it out to patients, you really have to engage in this cycle of evaluation and then redesign. So once you have your initial software, you roll it out to patients, and you get their feedback, as well as feedback from the clinicians. And again, that's something that has been shown in other tech solutions, that if you do this iterative design process, you maximize the user engagement, you maximize your chances of the users actually adopting your solution. So then how do you study these apps and their impact on clinical outcomes? So the first thing you really need to do is study the feasibility of using it in your patient population and user engagement. And what that study, the question that's really trying to answer is, did the end users actually adopt your solution? And then once you can prove that your patient population, the clinicians will actually use it, then you want to go on and do a comparative study. And the gold standard is obviously a randomized control trial, like with any other intervention. The interesting part about app study is what you actually use as a control group. You could use standard of care, but if a patient is approached and says that there's this great study where we randomize you to either getting an app or not getting an app, if they end up getting randomized to a no app group, they may just drop out of your study entirely. So what we've done in the colorectal cancer patient population with a randomized control trial is actually use a control app that is an app, but it's sort of the bare bones version of the app you created with the purpose of actually monitoring them post-op at home. Other possibilities, if this is available to you, if it's a particularly competitive market, you can use other commercially available apps, or you could also use traditional treatment modalities. And the best example of that is like an app food log to help somebody lose weight versus a paper food log. But again, that has the same sort of pitfall of if you randomize someone to not getting the app, they may just sort of drop out of your study. So in summary, the main points that I really want to drive home are that there are a very large number of apps available to patients, but few are very rigorously studied. And there's a huge need for clinicians to be more involved in this process to protect our patients. It's a vulnerable population of people. Also, app design really requires user input and feedback if you want the best chance for them to actually adopt your solution. And you should always do a feasibility study before a comparison, because it would be quite tragic if you develop this brilliant randomized control trial, spend all this money and all this time and effort, and then you realize there's no difference in your groups, and it was because nobody used your app because you didn't ask them what they liked and what they didn't like about the app. Thank you.